Studiometry has very powerful and customizable features for setting up and billing for your taxes. In this video, we'll go over 4 questions. How do we create tax types? How do we apply taxes to items? How do we present taxes in invoices? And how do we create tax reports? First question, how do we create tax types? We'll want to go to Studiometry's Preferences window and go to the Taxes section. Here we can see a list of current taxes in Studiometry, which in this database we don't have any yet. And below that we can see some settings related to taxes. To create a new tax type, we just click on the plus button below the list, and it brings up the tax editing window. So here we can enter the tax name and percent, as well as rounding and mode options. When you change the rounding or the mode, Studiometry will explain below here what that actually will do. So for now we're just going to set up a default sample tax of 7%. And when we hit OK, it'll be added to our list of taxes. I'm going to add one more tax type so that we can have multiple tax types here. Okay, so now we have both of our tax types set up in Studiometry's Preferences window. So that brings us to our next question. How do we apply taxes to items? You can do that in 3 ways in Studiometry. First, you can link taxes to debt categories, you can apply taxes to projects, and you can apply taxes to individual work items. The most common way is to link your taxes to your categories and rates, which we'll show you first here. To do this, let's open up Studiometry's new rate editing window by going to the Timesheet menu and selecting Edit Rates. This shows us all of our categories and rates within Studiometry, and you can actually see here there's a column for tax. Right now there's nothing in here because none of these categories are currently linked to a tax type. So let's say that for printed materials, whenever we bill for printed materials, we always have a tax that's associated with that item. Now you can have Studiometry automatically set this up. So to do this, I'm just going to double click on this row. And then within this category editing window, we can see default taxes. So if we click there, we'll see the list of taxes that we set up earlier, and we can automatically apply specific taxes. Now when I hit OK, it'll reload this list and show us that printed materials are always going to have the sample tax applied to them. Now to show you what this actually means to apply a tax to a category in Studiometry, I'm going to just set up an example work item that will use this tax automatically. I'm going to close out of the Categories and Rates window and close the Preferences window, and then just go to a project in Studiometry. And then I'm going to click the plus button and select Add Work and Expense, and this just brings up the work editing window. I'm going to select the type of printed materials, which is the type that we just applied that tax to. And now if I hit tax settings at the bottom here, I can see that sample tax has already automatically been applied to this item because we applied it to the printed materials type. So whenever we add a new work item that is a printed materials type, that tax will automatically be applied to that work item. So that's how you link taxes to your debt credit types and categories. The next way that we can apply taxes is directly to entire projects. To do this, I'm just going to cancel out of this window and select any project in the main window. We'll continue with the project that we have. And then I'm going to either click this Edit button here, or I can go to Project menu, Edit Project, and that will bring up the project editing window. From here, if we go to the Billing section, we can see the tax behavior of the project and our list of taxes that we created earlier. So the most important setting in this section is the project's tax behavior. If I click on this list, it brings up 3 options. Use debt specific, override debt specific, and merge debt and project specific. Now these 3 options might seem a little bit confusing, but really what they determine is when you generate an invoice for this project, which taxes will actually appear. Now earlier we used our printed materials category and we applied a tax to that category. So whenever a new work item is created that is printed materials, that tax will automatically be applied. But in some situations you might want to have a project that no matter what, there will be no taxes for that project. So if we wanted to do that, we could come to the project and say override debt specific settings. So that item that we created earlier of the printed materials, even though it has a sample tax applied to it, since this project's tax behavior is to override the debt specific settings, we would only have whichever taxes are applied here. And then the other option is to merge debt specific and project specific. What this means is that if a tax is applied either to the work item itself or to the project, then it will be calculated for that item. So, for example, the printed materials item that we created earlier, that will always have sample tax applied to it. But if for this project we always wanted to apply other tax and we just checked this, this would mean that that printed materials item would have both of these taxes applied to it. Because we are merging the debt specific, which is the printed materials will always have sample tax applied, and the project specific, which are shown here, that other tax is always applied. So these settings will apply to all work items on the project, whereas the debt specific tax settings will apply to individual debts. So I'll hit OK to save this, and then we'll go into the third way to apply taxes to work items, and that's to apply them directly to individual items. And to show you how to do this, I'm going to click on the plus button on the bottom again and select Add Work and Expense. And this will bring back up the work editing window from earlier. So if we want to apply a tax to just this item, we can do that. We would just click on the Tax Settings button at the bottom of the window, and then we can apply whichever tax that we want. Now remember, if for the project we have the tax behavior set to override debt-specific settings, then anything that we set here wouldn't even matter, because if the project overrides it, then these settings are ignored. So I'm just going to fill out some information for this work item and enter an amount. Now we can see here that we have the amount is 100 and the tax settings of both sample and other taxes are enabled, which would total 17%. So we would assume that this work item will have a grand total of $117, which it will when it's added to an invoice. However, when we hit OK here and we just add it to the project, this taxable work item will only show its pre-tax amount in the work and expenses section. So if we go to the work and expenses section, we can see the new taxable work item and the amount of 100. However, if we added a new invoice and we added this work item to that invoice, then the taxes would be presented. Which segues perfectly into our third question: how do we present taxes in invoices? To do this, let's go set up part of an invoice template by going to Studiometry's Preferences window and then going to the Template section. And from here, I'm just going to edit one of our invoice templates. There's an entirely separate tutorial video on how to set these up and all the different details you can put in, but for now we're just going to show you how to add some tax fields to the templates. So I'm going to double click on one of these invoice templates, and this brings up the template editing window. So the first thing that most people want to show on their invoices is just the tax amount for the entire invoice, and that's very easy to add. We've already got it added into this template here as a variable. To add any variable to your template, you would just click on the New Variable button in the toolbar, and it'll add in one of these where you can select under Item Information the variable. This one is tax amount, which just shows the total of all taxes for this invoice. If you want to show the taxes for each item, or if you want to show the items on the invoice with their taxes included, you would then want to edit the item row area. Now in invoices you can have what's called data rows or data columns, and again you can check out the invoice template tutorial for more information about those, but this invoice uses data rows. So I'm going to edit this debt credit item row area by clicking Edit Data Row, and we can see here one of the variables is item amount, and this will just show the amount of each item on the invoice. If I wanted to, instead of just showing the amount pre-tax and I wanted to show the taxed amount, I would click on the variable pop-up and then select item amount with tax, and that would change the variable. So now when the items are listed out on the invoice, it would show the taxed amounts. And then when I hit done and go back here, now when each work item and expense item is shown within this debt credit item row area, it will have the taxed amounts. And one other common thing that people like to show is the individual subtotals for each tax type on an invoice. So instead of just having the tax amount that includes all of the taxes for all tax types, they want to have a row for each tax type and the subtotal for that tax type. So we'll set that up in this example by using data columns. So this area here, this is a data row where you set up the entire row, and for each item on the invoice it will be repeated with all of the fields. A data column is just an area where when I hit new data column it will show one variable for all of the items on an invoice in a column. So under the right, under data column, we can select the data type, and I'm going to go all the way down to the tax related section. Here we can set up the tax name, tax amount, tax percent, and the tax amount with no currency symbol. So on the left we'll want the tax name, and then I'll set up another data column, drag it down here really quickly, and change the data type to tax amount. So we have these two data columns sitting here that have not been placed correctly yet. And I'm just going to really quickly resize these and replace this one tax amount variable with these two data columns. So I've just changed the font and the formatting and the positioning of these two data columns to match the other items on the invoice template. So now I'll save this template by closing it. And I'll also close the preferences window, and now we're back in the work and expenses section of a project. So to see how that template will produce output and show the taxes, we're going to go from the work and expenses section over to the invoices section of a project, and I'm going to click the plus button to create a new invoice. Now we can see here I've got my 3 work items that I created, and at the bottom we can see the invoice subtotal and then the tax total. So these items have taxes applied to them. The printed materials, for example, has the tax applied to it based on its category, and some of the other ones have taxes applied for various other reasons. So when we go to View Invoice and we select the template we created, we can go to the bottom now and see the subtotal, the sample tax, the other tax, and then the total. And for this invoice, we set it up to show each work item with the tax totals here. So that's why those are displayed as opposed to the pre-tax totals. So again, when you're editing the invoices, you can change how any of these fields appear to include or exclude taxes. And then at the bottom, you can create a list of your included taxes in the template. So that's how you present taxes and invoices. Now the final question, how do we create tax reports? I'm just going to cancel out of this window, and it's really easy to create tax reports in Studiometry. All you need to do is go to the Window menu and select Accounting Window, and then go to the Tax Reports section. You can use this window and all of its settings to export reports based on all of the taxes in Studiometry. You can filter by specific months or invoices or various other settings here, but it's a really easy and quick way to get all of your tax data out of Studiometry. So those are taxes in Studiometry. If you have any questions about this or anything else with Studiometry, please get a hold of us at support.orange.net.